Men, they get to go to their jobs and live in their careers, and we just stay home and, God, that's supposed to be enough. Look at our kids right now in that jungle gym. It is human nature to take risks, to go for something with a little thrill at the risk of falling.
All Candy Montgomery wanted was a little thrill. So how did she end up at the center of one of the biggest, most brutal murders in modern Texas history? That's at the heart of Love and Death, a riveting 7-episode Max Original Limited series. And this is the official Love and Death podcast, an HBO Max production in partnership with Texas Monthly Studio, the in-house agency for Texas Monthly. I'm your host, Nancy Miller, a journalist who loves twisty, turny true crime storytelling. And we have a doozy with Love and Death, a series drawn from the 1984 Texas Monthly feature and the gripping book, Evidence of Love, written by Jim Atkinson and John Bloom. So if you think you know the Candy Montgomery saga, trust me, you don't. There's so much more to this story, which is why after each episode of the series, we'll do a deep dive with the phenomenal cast and brilliant minds behind the show, along with top Texas Monthly editors. For this first episode, I'm speaking with the two TV titans who brought Love and Death to life. Series writer and creator David E. Kelley, and series executive producer and director Lesli Linka Glatter. Later in the podcast, we'll chat with the series star Elizabeth Olsen on why she wanted to play Candy Montgomery. We'll also hear from Texas Monthly executive editor Skip Hollandsworth about why this strange suburban murder saga could only happen in Texas. Remember, this is a companion podcast. We've done our best to not reveal too much too soon, but we do discuss key details from each episode. So go watch, then listen. Are you ready? Let's set the scene. Wiley, Texas, Friday the 13th, June 1980. And from the very first episode, we see something very bad and very violent has happened. Bloody handprints on a bathroom wall. Blood spatter on a tiled floor. What happened? Who did it? And why? To understand that, we go back in time 2 years to where this bewildering saga started. Back to 1978 in a bedroom community north of Dallas, Texas, where Candy Montgomery, a wife, mother, and first-row singer in the church choir, appears to have the picture-perfect life. But something's missing. She craves, what's the word she uses? Fireworks. And she gets a whiff of it with Alan Gore, the husband of her church friend, Betty Gore. What happens next is an affair so meticulously planned. What could possibly go wrong? But go wrong it does. Very wrong. And this is just the beginning. So let's kick things off with series creator and writer David E. Kelley and series executive producer and director Lesli Linka Glatter. Welcome, Lesli Linka Glatter and David E. Kelley, to the first episode of the Love and Death Companion podcast.
Thank
We're
you.
thrilled to be here.
Cool.
Yes, we are.
So let's kick things off. You've both had long, successful careers in television and could choose any project you wanted. So why this story?
Well, between Lesli and myself, we probably have about 70 years worth of television making, and we have never worked together. So at the original genesis was excitement of getting to work together. Beyond that, I think when you consider a series, the first question in any series is why this one? And what you're looking for is gripping subject matter and compelling characters. And this one just checked off all those boxes. It's a story that would be difficult to make up if you tried. Obviously, a great deal of drama, horror, even depravity. But what drew me to it, and I think Lesli in the end, was the pathology of kindness and empathy and love underneath this very horrific drama.
And I have to say, with our 70 years of shared mutual experience, I have always wanted to work with David. And the fact that it is this particular story that brought us together, I can't tell you what that means to me. And absolutely, if it wasn't true, you couldn't make it up. This is such a case of real life is stranger than fiction, and things are not what they appear to be. And I love the fact that it's very bucolic on the surface,
Yeah.
but what's underneath is a whole different story. And I read those two stories, the two Texas Monthly articles, and I think at the same time, David read the book after reading those articles and talking, and like, oh my goodness, I just wanted to be part of telling this story with David.
So you both read the source material, and then what happens? How did you connect and start adapting the characters in the story?
Well, we first read the articles in the book, so we knew what the subject matter was. We knew who the characters were. So that, as in terms of the process, you write the scripts, and we go back and forth and give notes on that. We craft the characters, and once it's in script form, and once we're satisfied with that, then I feel like the quarterback who hands the ball to someone else and says, go, run with it. In this case, I handed it to Lesli. And, the casting process, I think the first big move we made was casting Lizzie, and she just turned out to inhabit this Candy character in so many rich and compelling ways. You got her humanity, you got her complexity. At the end of the day, that's what you're looking to craft, a story and people that will cause your audience to gravitate and lean in.
Well, all I can say is we are in a team sport, and I never want to be the smartest person in the room, but I want to be in the room with the smartest people. And certainly with David, I got to be in that room. David writes characters that are real, with flesh and bone and hearts and souls on the page. And then I think we cast it well so they come to life.
I mean, it's a true ensemble. You have your stars, but you have this ensemble cast with Lily Rabe, Jesse Plemons. How do you know these people are going to connect?
Ooh, I wish there was a magic crystal ball that you could look at and know that they were going to connect. I mean, you hope you've made the best possible decisions, and I think it's part of how you set up the beginning. Like one of the things we did with that's why I say it's such a team sport. We had an amazing crew, and Sunday Stevens, who was our first AD, put a schedule together that was all about, the beginning of shooting was all about building the community. It was all the scenes in the church. It was the choir singing. It was establishing our world as this really inviting, beautiful world. And I think it set up the actors to really connect to each other. So by the time we were doing more intense scenes, they had the relationship, and it did feel like we had established a community. But, you hope for the best. You hope you have made the right decisions. I should also add that as much as David and I spent time on Zoom together, we had never met. I was about to go off to Texas, and we realized we had actually never been together in the same room.
Wait,
So
you've
we
never
had-
shared canapes at the Emmys or anything like that? Are you kidding? How
So
is
we
this
did get
possible?
together and have salmon and broccoli before I went off to Texas, because it's like, no, we can't have just met in a Zoom box. That's wrong.
Yeah, well, and so you met there, and what do you talk about? You talk about all the ambitions that you have for Candy's character. I mean, David, in terms of your writing process, how do you know when you're like, all right, this one's ready for Lesli to check out?
Well, when I'm writing, then I definitely am immersed in that world. It's like that's where I live. And in fact, when I first heard about the project, I initially thought, no, I'm not going to inhabit this for 3 or 4 months where someone picks up an axe and kills somebody. I did hear it was a great story, a riveting story, so I said, send it to me, let me read it. And I read the articles in the book, as we said, and as disturbing as it was, I think one of the most disturbing parts of it was that I found myself feeling for Candy.
Yes.
And almost rooting for her, not rooting for her to pick up an axe and kill someone.
Yes.
But these wants, this yearning, the holes that she was looking to fill. I felt for her. So in going into that world, the writing process, it felt like a very familiar one and a safe one and a loving one. Even knowing where the story was going to go, I felt comfortable with these people. And then when you come out of the world, then you're putting on your producer hat and you're flexing different muscles on, okay, how do you convey this? And again, because of the IP material that Lesli and I were both relying on, we had a real shortcut. And also, I think our communication connectivity, if you call it that, was a real shorthand too. We just connected right off the bat, and I think we knew instantly we were seeing the same show and feeling the same people and wanting to convey the same characters.
I totally echo that. I mean, I think if we were not on the same page, that would be really hard. But I think we were very connected in this process. And even if David wasn't there by my side, we were calling each other all the time, texting all the time. I would send something from the set. It felt very connected all the time. Like I felt like we were partners in crime.
Interesting word choice.
Or so to speak. I guess that was bad.
No,
I take that back.
It's perfect.
Partners in storytelling.
Now, and if I'm not mistaken, is this the first true crime story? This is a work of nonfiction, at least with material based in 2 articles and a book. You both have largely worked in fiction. I mean, complicated female characters, ensemble comedies and dramas, but was there a difference in a certain responsibility in the fidelity of material? And then how do you know when to depart from that? And then how do you two go about that?
Yeah,
That's a great question. Yeah.
Again, I resisted the project for the very reasons you suggest. Why I like to make stuff up. I don't want to be stuck with the facts.
Yeah.
But then when presented with this set of facts, I thought, oh my God, this is just too juicy. And in terms of the writing of it, the authors of the book did an excellent and thorough job. So I really felt that they took us behind the walls and the veils of these characters, which made it easier. That said, they were not present for a lot of scenes that were between either Alan and Candy. The dialogue of the scenes, you would have to imagine that. What we tried to do is stay very true to the story and the characters as we went about imagining that. Anything transactional in the 7 episodes, it happened. We didn't make up any facts. Nobody did anything that wasn't done. In terms of the words and the dialogue is how they communicated emotions, feelings, or thoughts within private scenes. Yeah, I would have to pretend and get inside the character's head and say, okay, what must have this been like? How did this probably go down? And again, we were very, very disciplined about trying to stay true to who these people were and what the story was.
Which is amazing. And then who would talk about having an affair for several months? It's like the most unsexy the beginning of any affair ever imaginable. But again, we would not have made that up. That's what actually happened. And there's humor in the circumstances. We never wanted to laugh at the characters. I want to be with and inside of the characters. I think this is a story where you laugh and you also feel anxious simultaneously.
Yes.
This will come to no good, and I just feel these characters have rich inner lives. And even when Candy does something horrible, I still feel for her.
Now, right from the first seconds on our screen, we get Nina Simone's Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood. That is a beautiful piece of music, probably an expensive piece of music, and one that sounds like it's it's a communicating to the audience what? That this isn't going to be the true crime story you're expecting? What is it trying to tell us? And how important was that piece of music to open the series?
So for me, it was about creating a sense of a real sense of the environment and the world that these people lived in, and the beauty of it, and the church, and the fact that, yes, you see the beautiful white picket fence, but you get up closer and the paint is peeling off that fence.
Yeah.
And the beautiful piece of china, but no, there are cracks all in it. It is, again, what's on the surface and what's underneath. And there's something about Nina Simone's voice and the kind of gruff, sense of soul underneath that just spoke to me completely, and I think to all of us. And we tried other pieces of music, and we, used score, and we used other songs of the time. And I think David and our music supervising team, Robert Erdang, I think the sense of time and place, because of the choice of music, is so real and relevant. And it just felt like the right combo. This is welcome to our world. It's both inviting and there's something a little dangerous here.
Right. It's very, very tricky. And we took our time with that main titles because we wanted a piece that conveyed both beauty and decay. They're not mutually exclusive.
Wow,
This was a town that was very communal, that people loved living there, but it was not perfect. There was ugliness under the beauty, and it wasn't belying the beauty, it was complicating it. And we wanted our main title and our song to sort of invite the audience to the world with that degree of complexity. So we went back and forth on main titles and songs for a long time, and we felt this one kind of hit the colors that we wanted to convey and establish our community with the audience from the beginning.
What I loved about episode 1, and I was wondering if there's more here or if I'm just a geek trying to read into more, but you have Grease and you have Olivia Newton-John in the duality of the two Sandys.
Right. And it was also a perfect movie to show the divide between Candy and Betty. Because Sandy would have been Candy's favorite character, and Sandy was a little offensive to Betty because she was a little too prurient, a little too promiscuous, a little too much out there. And Betty wasn't as open-minded and as tolerant about those kind of characters as Candy. But those were the movies of that time. Those were the pieces and the characters that our characters aspired to be. So it was very organic to the piece and very central to our two lead women characters.
Absolutely. And I think the duality of Sandy speaks to that in some way.
Yeah, it's the Madonna horror. Do you want to be the good Sandy? Do you want to be the naughty Sandy? And naughty Sandy wins in the end, right? She gets the guy in the end.
Yes. It's a bit of both.
All right. We're introduced to these two very complicated couples in episode 1. There's Candy and Pat, and Alan and Betty. Each marriage has its own tensions. Can you both talk a little bit about their dynamics, particularly Candy and Pat, and how it led to the affair?
Well, I think Candy and Alan, I think it was not so much about the sex, because David, you wrote it so fantastically. The first time they're together in the motel, it's the best 3 minutes of either of their lives. Yeah. But I think more than the sex, they wanted to be seen and heard. They wanted someone to just listen to them. I think sharing a meal, eating together, sitting on the bed, talking about what's important to them, what they're feeling, was more, they wanted a friend, a relationship. And I think they weren't seen and heard for who they were in their own marriages. And I think Pat and Candy, I mean, there's a scene that David wrote so beautifully between Pat and Candy, how Candy always wants more.
Yes.
And she says, yes, you're right. I want more. I want more for the kids. I want more for us.
Yeah, I think they were both, Betty and Candy, profoundly lonely people. The difference probably was Betty was lonely because Alan was gone and traveling a lot. Candy was lonely in the room with Pat because she just didn't feel regarded. And I agree with Lesli. We talked about this at end. I think that the affair was about wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, wanting to feel interesting in another person's eyes, because
And
the
desired.
mundanity of Candy's life was her oppression, and she was either going to break free of it or she wasn't going to survive emotionally.
I mean, there's that incredible scene where Pat Montgomery's on the sofa. Candy comes up and says, "Didn't you have a favorite character called Snugglepuss?" And he corrects her and says it's Snagglepuss.
Mama, do it. You once told me that your favorite character was Snugglepuss. Did you not tell me that, Pat?
Snagglepuss.
And you just feel it like, it's just that.
Yeah.
That was
And-
the impetus to start
Yeah.
the affair. I think if he had said something different in that moment, I don't know if it would happen.
We're coming to this, what seems to be like a wonderful moment in terms of finding fulfillment between these two people in this affair. And it's exciting. It's a thrilling time. And as we close, is there anything else as we go into episode 2 you want us to think about at the end of episode 1?
I would say things are not what they appear to be.
Mm-hmm. This
So
moment in
there's
time.
more, yes, there's more to this story.
So thank you both very much, David, Lesli. Thank you so much for joining us on the first episode of the Love and Death podcast. And we're going to have you back for episode 4.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This first episode is titled The Huntress. And as we see in this episode, Candy is on the hunt to have an affair when she picks up the scent of Alan Gore. And does anyone else smell trouble? Series star Elizabeth Olsen joins us to share more about the complicated and contradictory Candy Montgomery. Thanks for joining us on the first episode of the Love and Death podcast.
I'm very excited to be here.
We're here to really talk about Candy Montgomery, the character that you're playing in the series.
Yeah.
She seems to be a woman who's searching for something,
Yes.
and the world won't relent to what she wants.
Yes.
So tell me how you understand Candy and what attracted you to play that kind of character.
I think Candy lives her life very aspirationally, whether it's trying to present something aspirational or trying to grasp something that is aspirational to her.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if she's clear as to what that is exactly. But what she knows is that there's a feeling she gets when she reads, whether it's romantic novels or when she thinks about her career, there's just something more to this world that she wants, and she wants to feel it, and she wants fireworks, and she's a seeker and a doer and an optimist. And so that to me was such a fun way to start a character who's always looking on the bright side, even though they're also trying desperately to find something greater.
Yeah, and in this community, she's pretty prominent, and she's put herself sort of at the center of both the church and within this community itself.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about how you sort of situated her in this world.
She is a gatherer, and she wants to be a community leader.
Uh-huh.
I think she gets stimulation from being a very active mother, whether it's at school or at church. She and Pastor Jackie would travel to all these different local churches and just talk about the role of love specifically, less so about the Bible itself, but more about community and love. And so she was like constantly, truly putting herself out there, trying to connect to people within communities and other women. I think she could never be tired of seeking and doing and being around other people like her or trying to be a source of inspiration. And so it's really interesting thinking about that personality that has to confront this huge tragedy, and what someone does with that. This person who seemingly is so upbeat and positive and someone who puts herself out there in a really raw and vulnerable way.
What I like about what you're saying about Candy's backstory, which is featured in both the book Evidence of Love and in the Texas Monthly article, is that Candy is like a feminist. Now, did you know about any of this backstory when you got the script, and was this part of your decision-making factor in how you were going to approach the part?
I knew nothing about the backstory. I just read these scripts, and when I first spoke to Lesli and David about this project, Lesli was saying that a huge reference to her tonally would be To Die For, and that really informed how I thought of the scripts, and the playfulness of like the dark humor in it that's through that lens is how I knew that I would also really love working with David and Lesli because of that being a tonal inspiration.
It's funny you mentioned To Die For, which is, of course, starring Nicole Kidman, who's a producer on this project.
Yeah. And so I already had this character just from on the page that I was interested in discovering and playing. And it was really helpful. I really love having source material. I'm not, sometimes I look at a project and I just think that there's a beginning and an end, and my goal is to make everything in between make sense, and it doesn't really matter what exactly happened before, and doesn't really matter what happens after. So sometimes I approach things that way.
Right.
And so when I do have source material, it ends up being this amazing life that because of actually working on this job, I've decided that I actually get a lot from creating such rich backstories, because I thought specifically the book, Evidence of Love, was so rich with her personal letters that was the closest I could get to her, and it's the only interviews that she participated in. And so that was really the only real connection I could have to her, from her. And I really took it all to heart without judgment.
So we are offered a few clues, not necessarily in the motive or the outcome, but we're offered a few clues into what brings Candy to this point where she even wants to really explore an affair. And she says, your character says, I've done everything that I was supposed to do. Like, where's my payback? And I thought, okay, maybe this is taking place in 1978, but I know a lot of women and mothers and wives feel like that.
Yeah.
So did that, when you're looking at the script and that type of dialogue, is that like, okay, I get this. This isn't vintage material. This is resonating.
Yeah, I think what's so modern about Candy is she really is thinking about marriage beyond the construct of the institution itself. And I do think that's a really modern way to, like, philosophically think about what is marriage, what is my relationship to my husband, and what am I receiving, and what is my relationship to being a woman in this world today and being a mother. She became a mother very young, and she resumed what she's such a dreamer, right? So that's also a huge part of her. She, based on these letters that are in the book, she was dreaming of having a house. She was dreaming of having a family and a kids and settling down, and that was dream number one, and she got it. And then she was continuing to she really loved reading romance novels, and I think she was really hungry for whatever that feeling is that you could get from a romantic lover that she just wasn't getting from her husband.
And you, Elizabeth Olsen, are not in the position of cracking the case,
No,
right?
and that's not my job either. My job is to tell a story, make it entertaining as well,
Right.
and to defend a character. That's my job.
And when you say defend a character, you mean, like, what does that mean in terms of your approach then? Is understanding her?
Yeah, understanding her and understanding her with the experience that she is linearly coming, having these experiences and trying to understand what leads to these moments in our lives and why we are the people we are and making the decisions that we make, and not to like defend her being like this is that defend her in this situation as a third party, but to understand her and try and empathize as much as possible. And that to me is always my goal. And I think I somehow always am drawn to characters that are morally conflicted or ambiguous, or they frustrate people because they're anti-heroines. And I want to understand them, get behind them, and try and figure out without diagnosing how these people think and why they do what they do, even if their morality is not in line with mine.
Like, again, we're not the moral police. We're here to watch the unfolding of a tragedy. But I just, you do a brilliant job of giving us this extra that's happening underneath her, this kind of like, even like in the way of like the feathering of the eyes, that you sort of see like this person who knows there's more and is like constantly being told to stop wanting more. Even though she's been deprived of all of the things that she probably should be afforded to have. A writing, an education, those anyway.
Yeah.
So were those things that you were thinking about? Like, I mean, I don't know if anyone's like shaking a fist as they're preparing for a role and they're in a script, but how do you connect that in?
I mean, I think it was, you really trust the writing to tell that part of the story. And my first in with the character was really trying to understand what her voice was and her dialect. And because she grew up being kind of an army brat and living in multiple places, but she had been consistently in Texas for the 10 years that lead up to these events. And based on her character background and what we know of her childhood and her other relationships with boys that became her relationship with men, and what sounds like, she kind of had this really bubbly, vivacious, not bubbly, but vivacious personality. And you try and think of, okay, so then what, since I don't have a voice recording of her, how does that relate to a woman in Texas who's going to use her femininity to get what she wants? And so you start playing with like the lyricism of this specific accent, and you start playing with your registers of your voice. And I think for me, that becomes almost more informative of someone than thinking of just their wants and desires all the time. It's like, how do they go through the smallest obstacles in life? How much energy do they put into things? How quickly do they walk? Like, how quickly do they talk? And to me, that's what really started to build Candy and made it, that was like how she would hold herself. And I'm kind of someone who like caves in and hunches a lot, and I try and become a bit more masculine from my own childhood of wanting to like be taken seriously or whatever. And so I saw her differently, and to put that in your body, that to me is almost more informative than knowing that she feels like she what her actual wants and desires are.
Got it. Oh! Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Are you sure?
Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Good. Okay.
You don't want to sit for a bit?
No, I'm fine, Alan. I'm fine, thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Sorry, I gotta communicate.
What do you mean he smelled like sex?
I mean, he smelled like sex.
Are we talking about the same Alan Gore?
No, but how a man looks and smells can be two totally different things. And
Plus what?
well, I was kind of getting the sense that he was liking the smell of me too. Like I could maybe go in that direction.
All right, so there's another really important sort of abstract detail for viewers in episode 1. What is the catalyst isn't something that you see or hear. It's something that Candy smells on the volleyball court with Alan Gore, which is like one of the strangest meet cutes, like stank meet cutes I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
And so, like, Candy wants fireworks. She gets Alan Gore.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of fireworks, he's a little bit of a damp book of matches. I mean, right? Or am I like? How do you? How does that How does her desire match up with what she gets?
So I have a really obsessive sense of smell, personally. Like smells are crazy for me. I go through the world overwhelmed by smells all the time, and if she felt like she smelled like their pheromones would do magical things, I trust it, and I'm just going to lean in and let that be her guide.
Were there any like weird conversations like, all right, so Alan Gore would smell like, I don't know, Old Spice is like 1970s hamburger helper. Like I
think it's more of a like skin thing, like what people's skins smell like to other people. And being an actress, I've had to smell people that I'm not in a romantic relationship with. And I can tell based on how they smell whether or not I would want to be romantically involved with them.
That's interesting.
But that might sound weird, but I've had those experiences
It's
before.
chemistry, right?
Yeah, and there's so I take it at face value that she was like, "Oh my God, the way he smells," and it did something to her, and it turned her on, and so I'll just go with it.
I also sort of shows you Candy's like openness, right? Like she just has this metabolism to try and like take things in quickly and understand them and respond to them really quickly.
Yes.
Sorry.
Alan, have you never been French kissed before? You've never had a woman's tongue in your mouth? I think you're gonna quite like it.
Now, let's carry that sense of smell into the continental hotel scenario. And when you're telling me like, oh, I'm going to get like a sex scene from the late 70s, that's going to be like rippling satin sheets. We're going to get like the Vaseline lens. There's going to be some guitar wah-wah pedal maybe. That is not the sex that we get in this show.
No, it's not.
So when you read the script, was it like most awkward sex happens of all time here?
No, what we really, every single sexual moment that they share, Jesse, Leslie, and I kind of created a title of each event. And there's a huge reversal we felt in the first time they see each other, that based on how David wrote the dialogue, that all of a sudden Candy is now starting to backtrack and not feel so brave. And it gives Alan the opportunity to stand up in a way that maybe he hasn't yet so far in their affair, or their attempt at an affair, or their planning of an affair.
Right.
And so that's where we started. And we also were talking about these people, there's not like a lot of like porn on the internet, it's not that time. I think, to go back to what David wrote, he always in detail talked about the state of the food, whether the food was fully eaten and put away. They ate all the only thing that was out was dessert. So that means they ate the full meal beforehand. And so it was really about the food determining their comfort, whether or not when they should have sex.
Well, and it's even a prop because she has this great moment where she holds up the chicken leg. You hold up the chicken leg and you're like, I'm feeling like this. And it's like, oh, she's nervous too.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many funny like high school kinds of moments when it comes to intimacy between the two of them. And so we leaned in on that they started to feel more brave and sexy, and the clothes started coming off a bit more as they got more comfortable, even though they showered, but that felt different than wearing her favorite lingerie pieces, which are full gowns. So we talked about the progression in that way of their intimacy, which is also about their intimacy as friends, because sometimes they would just meet up and never have sex. They would just talk the whole time, which says a lot about what the affair was, I think. And then, at the same time, when we see Candy having sex with her husband, she's naked because that's what she does with her husband. So we wanted there to be a clear difference of what kind of intimacy she has in her marriage, and not make it just about this like really hot, sexy, steamy love affair, because it really didn't sound like that to us.
Well, no, and it seems like, there's almost, your heart kind of breaks because Alan has never like French kissed anyone before. And Candy is very, I think, just approaches that in a really beautiful way, right?
Yeah, being
like,
kind.
Kind.
And hearing that or reading that, they're obviously not having wild sex.
No.
He's never French kissed a woman before.
That's right.
And so you have to, you're not.
So he's having the best time of his life.
Yeah. Just, missionary. So that's really how that's how we spoke about it, and that's how we kind of designed their affair.
Well, and I think what makes me even sort of more upset for Candy, we're looking at it from this very compassionate point of view, is that she's like, oh, this guy's only got so much potential. And I'm still cooking the food, and I'm still like, making the desserts and bringing the wine and taking care of all this shit.
But he still has the most perfectly shaped penis she has ever seen.
I was like, is that like late 70s BDE? Alan had BDE this whole time. When they talked about that, I was like, damn, they're really saying that.
Yeah. And yeah, so, there was that for her too. She had some great sex. It didn't have to do much.
Well, on that note, thank you so much, Elizabeth Olsen, for joining us on episode 1 of the Love and Death podcast. There is a lot more ahead, and we're excited to see where the series takes us.
It was great to be here. I really loved talking about it in this form.
Thank you. We'll hear from Elizabeth Olsen again in a future episode. Since Love and Death is such a Texas story and was adapted from the pages of Texas Monthly back in the 80s, we thought it'd be fun to close out each episode of the podcast with a segment called Only in Texas, featuring an editor from Texas Monthly. For this first run, our expert, or Texpert if you will, executive editor Skip Hollandsworth. Skip has been with the magazine for 34 years and is one of the most prolific true crime writers of our time, including the author of the best-selling book, Midnight Assassin. He's also a journalistic hero of mine. So, may I officially welcome you to the Love and Death Companion podcast, Skip Hollandsworth, executive editor of Texas Monthly. Let's kick things off by talking about Texas Monthly and the magazine's legacy in true crime storytelling, especially with long-form features, like the original Love and Death in Silicon Prairie piece that ran all the way back in 1984.
84, but we had crime stories running 50 years ago. It's always since 1973. It's always been part of the Texas Monthly canon, is that writers love to go out and do true crime stories. Back then, when they were first kicking them off, they called it nonfiction crime, not true crime. And the writers all loved to sort of outdo one another with the flashiest, showiest, most prurient magazine story they could find. And We had a tremendous array of diverse stories. There from some of the older writers that are long gone now, retired or moved on to the laptop in the sky. We wanted to find a story with lots of content, something to the story that's not just about the crime, something that's not just tawdry, but has something to say about the people in Texas and the way they lived and the different types of people there were. So Texas always produces these great characters.
Yeah.
From Bonnie and Clyde to Lee Harvey Oswald to a hitman that killed a federal judge. We just have, there's always a debate as to why so many Texas stories are so interesting when it comes to true crime.
Yes.
And is it because we just have so many people? Is it because we're still connected to the frontier a little bit?
Yeah.
Is it because we have there's a lot of us that have a wild streak in us? I don't have the answer, and I've been asked this question for at least 40 years.
Yeah.
What is it that makes us love true crime stories? And it just could be because we have a prurient nature and we love stories that cut beneath the surface. I think a lot of our lives, and this has to do with the stories that Jim Atkinson and John Bloom wrote, but a lot of our lives are carefully cut out. We keep our passions sort of subdued. We don't let anything bubble to the top. We just sort of live normal lives. And so when someone steps across the line and does things that you just cannot fathom happening, like Candy Montgomery,
Yep.
then it takes on this kind of mythic element. And people are dying to try to find out, why did this person succumb to such an act of violence, whatever that act is?
Now, you've been executive editor of Texas Monthly, and you've been like the shoe leather reporter for a long time. And one of the reasons why Texas Monthly true crime stories are so successful is long form. It's the source material for this series. It comes down to the reporting. So I understand you didn't write the source material for this series, but tell me, just as a journalist, how you approach the reporting for something like this. How important are the relationships and the access to someone like Candy Montgomery for us to get this point of view that I don't think any other article or book had? Then the same with your work.
I think a lot of people underestimate how difficult it is to write a good true crime story.
Yeah.
You've basically got to live with the people that are involved, whether it's a hard-boiled detective or an eccentric defense attorney or a haunted victim. So that's why a lot of true crime that you read sort of seems one-dimensional, because the writer just doesn't have the time or hasn't been given the time to get as in-depth with the characters as possible. The true crime stories are driven not by the crime, but by the characters.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important. That's why Texas Monthly has always been a little different, because it allows its writers to go disappear for months trying to cover one of these crime stories.
Well, let me ask you this, Skip. After all these years of reporting on all these stories, what still intrigues you about reporting a piece, finding a story, or even watching and listening to podcasts and TV series about these subjects?
The other day in Fort Worth, or a few months ago in Fort Worth, a older man was arrested on DNA evidence and accused of committing a murder that was infamous in Fort Worth in the early 1970s, mid-1970s. And I went to the prison to see him, driving all the way down there after he had been convicted, thinking, why am I doing another one of these stories? And there had been rumors that he might have killed before. And he began telling me he says, I didn't kill the girl in that brown dress. And I went, what brown dress? And he was talking about another murder, and in his old age, he had gotten the two confused and conflated, he was telling me about a different murder than the murder I'd come to see him for. And I sat there and I went, this is why I do this. What happened to the girl in the brown dress? What did he do about it? And that story has still not emerged yet, but I think someday it will.
Oh my God, I'm getting like my pulse is quickening at what the future of this piece is going to be. Thank you so much, Skip Hollandsworth, for appearing on the Love and Death podcast. It's been great having you. Appreciate it.
I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Skip. Thanks for listening to the first episode of the official Love and Death podcast. We'll be back on April 28th for episode 2 with Jesse Plemons and Lily Rabe, who offer some great marriage advice and terrible sex tips in their roles as Betty and Alan Gore. See you next time. Our executive producers are Maddie Builder and Aaron Kubatsky. This episode is also written and produced by me, Nancy Miller. Brian Standifer is our audio engineer, editor, and mixer. Music is courtesy of Warner Media, HBO Max, and Brian Standifer. Special thanks to David Ertzua at Studio Awesome. Watch Love and Death now on HBO Max.